Hi, this is Pastor Munya of revivalrev.com. Thank you for joining me on this month's presentation. And the title of my presentation is Run, Forrest, Run. And no, this has got nothing to do with Forrest Gump or the acting skills of Tom Hanks. But I want to talk about how to escape from an abusive relationship. Now, if you've never been in an abusive relationship, you might have a loved one that's in such a relationship, and you might find yourself thinking, why can't they just walk away? Why can't they just get in the car and drive to the next state or get on a Greyhound bus and just go somewhere else and start fresh? But those that have been in abusive relationships or are currently in such relationships, they will tell you that it is not easy to escape. In fact, it is reported that 75% of domestic related deaths occur when a victim tries to escape from the abuser. So it can literally cost them their lives. And also understand that when a person is in an abusive relationship, they struggle with a number of emotions and a number of fears. And I want to talk about at least 3 main emotions that I feel that the victim of an abuse struggles with. They may struggle with a number of emotions, but I'm just going to briefly touch on 3 of those emotions. I believe that the victim of an abusive relationship struggles with the emotion of love. Usually they find themselves loving the individual but hating the abuse. And this may be difficult to understand for some people that are not in such relationships, but they find that they love the individual but they hate the abuse. Remember, the abuser is not abusive 24 hours, 7 days a week. It is said that even a dead clock is correct twice a day. So even though Charles is a jerk, Charles might have 1 or 2 redemptive qualities. So the victim of an abuse finds themselves caught in between, struggling with the emotion of love. And after 10, 15, 20 years, they find themselves going through the same old cycle simply because they don't know what to do. They love the individual but hate the abuse. The second emotion that I'll talk about is the emotion of hope. Every single month, every single week, every single year, they convince themselves that, hey, things are going to get better. Charles or the abuser, whether it's male or female, they convince themselves that the abuser is going to change, that this could be the year, this could be the month, this could be the week that things will get better. So they keep going through the same old cycle of abuse because of the emotions of love and hope. And then the third emotion, which is very tangible and very real for an individual that's in an abusive relationship, is the emotion of fear. Remember, abuse has to do with intimidating the other individual and controlling them. So sometimes a victim literally fears for their own personal safety, and if there are children involved, it makes it worse. They fear for the safety of the children. So the individuals go through the same old cycle because of the emotions of love, hope, and fear. And other people stay in the same relationship because they just don't know the resources that are out there for them. They feel like they have no one to talk to and they have nowhere to go. Do you know that in the US, there are 3 times more animal shelters than domestic violence abuse shelters? So some individuals feel like, hey, I have no one to turn to and I have nowhere to go. They just don't know what's out there for them. Abuse can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be sexual, it can be mental, it can be financial. Whenever someone seeks to control you, to intimidate or to instill fear, that is a form of abuse. And also remember that abuse cuts across the board. Usually when we talk about domestic abuse, we think of the abuse between a man and a woman, the abuse between a husband and a wife. But abuse cuts across the board. It cuts across the races. It cuts across the genders. It cuts across the social classes. It affects many individuals. Did you know that the elderly can also be affected by domestic abuse? Sometimes the elderly are in the care of relatives, and those relatives begin to control the finances. They control where the elderly will go to. They control what the elderly will wear, but they control every aspect of the elderly people's lives. And that can be a form of domestic abuse. And the elderly might feel like they have no one that they can talk to because this is an issue that is often not addressed. So they feel like they have no resources and they have no one to call and they have no one to talk to. And usually the people that are abusive are actually relatives. So the elderly can be affected by domestic abuse. Teen dating In teen dating, there can also be domestic abuse. And remember, the abuse can just be as aggressive and can just be as bad as in adult relationships. So teen dating, there's also abuse that takes place there. And with teenagers, I know there's a plane that's passing over. All right, but remember that with teenagers, the emotions can be extremely intense. Teenagers, the emotions of love and the emotions of passion, the emotions of hatred, they all seem to be intensified. And sometimes jealousy and possessiveness can be seen as signs or proof of love. It is said that by the time a young girl reaches the age of 20, 1 out of 3 would have experienced domestic violence of some form, of some kind. So the abuse is just as real and just as aggressive in teen dating as it is in adult relationships. Domestic abuse can also take place in same-sex relationships, and this is something that is also not often talked about. It is said that when a person is a victim of abuse in a same-sex relationship, sometimes they struggle with emotions of shame and emotions of isolation because they feel like they have no one that they can talk to, and maybe because of the culture that they're in, maybe because of their religious beliefs, they feel like they have no one and nowhere to turn to. So all these individuals can be affected by abuse. And in this presentation, I'm going to give you a step-by-step guideline on how to flee from an abusive relationship. And I believe that abuse has 3 cycles. The first cycle of abuse, of domestic abuse, is what I'll call the tension phase. And these are the warning stages. This is the moment or the season that you see the warning signs. Sometimes it's when that individual is controlling your telephone calls. In this stage, the violence has not yet escalated. There may be signs of violence, there may be signs of control, but the tension is beginning to build up. That's the initial stage. You might have your verbal arguments. You might throw a couple of pots and pans. You might shove. There might be a little bit of shoving. But remember, the violence is not yet intense. It's not yet escalated. That is the initial stage. There are always warning signs. They say that the beginning is always in the end. That means that the warning signs will tell you of things that are about to come. So that's the first stage. The tension is building up. There's the arguments and there is the control. Controlling who you talk to over the phone, controlling where you are. They want to know who you're talking to. They want to know where you have been. So the tension is beginning to build up. And then the second stage of abuse is when the actual violent event or actions take place. That is the second stage. And this is where he shoves you down the stairs. This is where the violence actually escalates. This is where he might pour hot water over you or pour oil over you. Or he might physically abuse, sexually abuse you or the children. But this is where the violence takes place. And then the third stage is what is known as the seductive calm. This is when the abuser promises. They promise you the world. They promise that they'll go to every Joyce Meyer conference. They promise that they'll attend the Billy Graham crusades. They promise that they'll go for counseling. They promise that they'll move heaven and earth for you. They promise that this is the last time. But if you've been in an abusive relationship for at least 5, 8, 10 years, you know that this is a cycle that will continue. You go through what is known as the seductive calm, where they make promises. And they usually say that this is the best time for you to start thinking or planning your escape. And they also say that this is the most dangerous time, because if you try to escape and then for some reason you end up back in the same relationship, the efforts to control you and to keep you in that relationship become intensified, and it becomes more difficult for you to escape. So the seductive calm, that is the best time for you to begin to plot your escape. And I'm just going to give you some practical steps on how you can begin to think of your escape routes. Alright, I'm going to tell you of the material things that you will need to escape. I'm going to start off with the material things before I move on to some of the practical things. The first thing that I feel that you should get would be a picture of the abuser. Make sure that you get a picture of the offender. Make sure you get a picture of the abuser. Get a picture. So that's the first thing. Why is this important? Let's say you move into a different neighborhood. They are able to show your neighbors and tell them, listen, if you see this individual, make sure you